Hello and welcome back to The Halfway Point. Networking can sometimes feel like one of those things that everybody says is important, but when you're juggling staffing issues, finances, patient access, CQC and everything else that comes with running a modern practice, attending a conference can easily drop to the bottom of the priority list. I'm pleased today to be joined again by James, who's one of the other directors at LPM. Hi, James.
Hi, Beth.
And one of the things James and I generally believe in, that some of the most valuable learning within primary care happens when you step away from your desk and spend time with colleagues, suppliers, partners and other professionals who are kind of facing the same challenges as you are. We've both recently had opportunities to speak at events like Management in Practice, Best Practice in London and Birmingham, and the Primary Care Show in Birmingham. And every time we come away having learned just as much from delegates and exhibitors as we've hoped they've learned from us. So today we thought we'd just talk a little bit about kind of why networking matters and what you can gain from attending these events, and why investing in your own professional development is more important than ever. So listeners might know James already from previous episodes, but James, if you want to just recap kind of your background with this topic as a challenge for you in a minute or less.
For those that have listened to podcasts with me on before, James Bowman, one of the directors at LPM, also Development and Transformation Manager with a primary care network over on the East Coast in North Yorkshire. And, it's conference season, and obviously there's a familiar pattern that many of us fall into where we focus on the agenda, the speakers, the sessions that we don't want to miss. We try and we treat that networking as something optional, some things that happen if there's time, but I think it's real about making sure that we get the true value of any conference that's out there, not only of what you want to hear, but who you connect with. And we see that with the conferences that we put on at LPM as well. Some of them are small and intimate in numbers, but the value that the individuals get from it, not only from networking with one another in small intimate groups, or whether it's at a large place like Best Practice, Management in Practice, that, you've got to leave that conference with a chance to have a good peer-to-peer network, engaging with others that you would never naturally engage with. It's not just about access, it's about the potential.
Yeah, I think that there's some great points there, and I'm thinking about some of the companies that now using a lot of my practices, and it's I'd never heard of them before going to a conference, and actually kind of getting to know them over the years and seeing their software develop and kind of seeing their values as well. And it's great to see kind of how that evolves over the years with all these companies. So just going down to its simplistic form then, why do you think networking is particularly important for people working in general practice?
I think it's one of the most powerful things about conferences, isn't it, Ben? It's something that we often take for granted. And it's about bringing the right people together in the right place at the same time with the same mindset. Practice management and PCM management, federation management is becoming such an isolated and lonely job sometimes. If you don't go and network, how do you know that you're actually picking up the best practice, that you're actually refreshing your skills and your knowledge with what's coming to the market, what's out there? There's a lot of individuals that still don't go to conferences, that are missing out on that networking. How often in a working day that you actually get peers facing the same similar challenges, leaders trying to shape that direction in the way that primary care should be going, listening to what NHS England, CQC, some of the big tech companies are actually out there doing that could be implemented to make practice life easier, practice management life simpler to a degree, what's out there to outsource some work, etc. There's always skills out there. Those potential partners are looking for collaboration, stakeholders looking for piloting new ways of working. We know that there's a number of PCM pilots going on. There's other neighbourhood pilot schemes going on at the moment. There are organisations out there chomping at the bit, for want of a better word, that are looking to collaborate and move things forward, to get their name out there, to work with you, to see how they can integrate and collaborate with not only primary care, but with the patient networks that were out there, to try and give that better patient care in a more rounded neighbourhood fashion. That then links back to some of the neighbourhood working podcasts that we did a while back, wasn't it, Ben? But I would also say that attending conferences is about the concentration of effort. We've got to think about what are the emerging factors? What can we concentrate our best efforts on? Is it a quick chat in the queue waiting to attend a room event or a speaker event? Is it that chat waiting the queue up on entrance? Is it also an introduction to somebody that you already know? Just reaffirming that network as well. If I go back many years, whilst I was in the armed forces, a lot of business got done over our tea break at 10 o'clock. If you wanted something doing, you would network at 10 o'clock over a piece of, over a cup of tea and a piece of toast at 10 o'clock. It was that great network.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of things happened in that 10 o'clock break. And that's the way I see it at conferences as well. You can go and get a lot of business done, affirm those networks, affirm new networks. The power of social media and LinkedIn becomes even better after the conference as well. For picking up those conferences. And one thing I've learned over the last few years is I've now got a digital business card. So people just scan the QR code off my phone. They've got my contact details now. That links not only to the PCN, it links to LPM, it links to, other areas, my books, etc., etc. So it's about the power of that network and the peer relationship building, I think those moments in time, whilst you're at that conference, not only are you learning from the speakers up on the podiums, but when you do your peer-to-peer networking, sat down having lunch, sitting next to somebody, don't be frightened in sitting down at a table with somebody you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an introvert by character sometimes, even though you probably won't get it. I don't mind sitting down and having a quick chinwag with somebody. It's about exploring new ideas, unexpected collaborations, looking for business opportunities, driving that hard bargain. And I think in primary care, we tend to accept the first price that somebody does. We're not out there like the commercial world, driving a hard bargain, getting 2 or 3 quotes for something for similar suppliers, and then playing them off against one another.
Yeah.
We don't do it often enough. And also the most important thing is about your own personal career development. Is being able to showcase and evidence that you've gone out and you've learned something new. You've reaffirmed all the new guidance and learning that's out there. And really, the irony is that it's not formal, is it? It's sometimes part formally scheduled, not formally scheduled, and you get a greater learning aspect from it, I think, in my point of view.
I think you're right there, and I was just thinking I'm very similar. I was described once as a introverted extrovert. Which I think there's probably many people who can relate to that. When I need to be, I can be an extrovert, but I'm quite happy locked away at home. Getting on with things but on your own type thing. And I think you make a great point there as well, because I often think about, especially with the primary care management role, we look at GP colleagues and there is a constant emphasis on learning, CPD, their appraisals, reflections, everything like this. And it's that's deliberate. That's the same in other industries, the airline industry. It's not a unique model just for healthcare. But actually, do we take the time to do that? Probably not. And it's very hard sometimes to justify a day away from the practice when you've got everything else going on. But as you've highlighted, once you get out and get going, there's so much there.
That's really important, Ben, isn't it? It's about, we've become really reliant and heavy users on emails, Teams, virtual meetings. That face-to-face interaction is slowly being eroded. That face-to-face interaction at a conference, at a meeting, stepping away from the office environment becomes so much more valuable. I hold face-to-face meetings occasionally now, and when people are in the room, they get so much more out of it. Because in person, we pick up on those nuances around tone of voice, body language.
Yeah.
The energy and the enthusiasm. People on screen don't have their cameras on. How can you see what's happening? I could be quite animate if I really wanted to, and sometimes. But then you also can gauge the genuine interest. Or is it because others are there looking at another screen, working away, sort of half-heartedly listening? Not are you listening type thing, because they're on you. And you can see that they're doing other things. But having that face-to-face interaction is so much more valuable. And then when you physically met somebody, you start to build that trust up, don't you? And I think nowadays having that trust factor sort of then eats into the values of what you're trying to achieve. So that value management, that values-based interaction, it then becomes more memorable. It becomes more humanized as well. And then we're not just then an email, are we? We're not just an email address. Yeah, who did I speak to the other day? Yeah, I spoke to Ben at blah, blah, blah. So you're not just that synonymous email address at the end of a forever growing chain, an inbox query as such. But it also gives you the visibility to ask questions, share insight, and join in, really thought-provoking discussions. How many people sit there at conferences listening to the speakers without challenging what they're saying? Or actually putting their hand up and saying, I hear what you're saying, that's great. How can I now take this away and do something similar, spread and adopt what you're doing in our area as well? So yeah,
that's really interesting, and that's some of the feedback I've had on some of my, especially the AI talks lately. Is the theory is lovely, but what next? And it's sort, you're right. It gets you thinking. Like we have 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes sometimes. So normally you try and save about 10 minutes for a Q&A at the end. I'd rather we had a 10-minute presentation and a half an hour Q&A. I love the Q&As because that's where you get the real value from, both as the presenter, but equally sitting in the audience. And then, those light bulb moments. Oh, hang on, I can do that in my practice this way. And, right, I need to go and talk to this company about doing that or network with that person. And like you said, I don't think you necessarily get that. You get it to a point online, but it's very, like you said, it's that human element. Deep down, we're all social animals, whether we like it or not, and that gets lost on an online. Whereas, like you said, on the conference, you can go and talk to the person afterwards. And there's a real value in that, and there's some definite, and it's great to see because you can see seeds planting in people as they're asking questions, and you think like, I want to follow up with them in 6 months to see where they're going to go with their ideas that they've come from today. So it goes both ways, both from presenting, I think, as well as being in attendance and listening in.
If I take PCPN down in London, the conference that happened a couple of weeks ago, being afforded the opportunity to sit down at dinner between the 2 days, that was really invaluable to sit there with a group of other individuals that have come down, even though I was down there as a speaker. It's about the conversation that you had today might not lead to something immediate, but it's also about, what happens in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 12 months' time. I remember speaking to a number of exhibitors at Management and Practice about 9-10 years ago. When I go back and visit other conferences like Best in Practice, Primary Care Show, Management in Practice, you tend to see the same individuals, even if they've moved on to different tech companies or other organisations. Go and have a cup of coffee with them. Go and have, a quick chat with them. See how they're doing. Have that informal catch up with them. Because sometimes you might be able to then reach out with an opportunity, or they might be able to recommend somebody else to you. And sometimes that, that old adage, an idea shared is a problem halved, or whatever it is. Problem halved as such, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would say that sometimes you've got to try and put that stigma of having that imposter syndrome put to bed. Go out there and be a collaborator, be a partner. Don't be afraid to put your head above the parapet and, speak about something. If you've got something that you're passionate about, go out there and speak about it. Go and follow the opportunities because they'll flow back, not only to you or, even if we find it at LPM, when we start speaking to other practices or speaking to other colleagues, we've got a network of organisations that we can recommend or that we work with that come and sponsor our events. So we've built up a good network of individuals that we can start to rely upon. That also leads into our conferences like in Newcastle on the 11th of June, over in Preston in September, and Salisbury in November. So, we've already got a good host of individuals that are willing and ready to come and collaborate and work with you and speak with, anybody about building that network up, offering services in a two-way street. And I think that's going to be even more important as we move to that neighbourhood way of working again, Ben.
I think you're right there, yeah.
what am I trying to build today ready for tomorrow?
Following the success of LPM's very first New to Practice Manager conference, we are bringing them back with dates right across the country. This year, we're heading to Hull, Salisbury, Newcastle and Preston. And the best part, it is completely free to attend. If you're new to the practice manager role and feeling like everyone else has the manual except you are not alone. These conferences are relaxed, practical and honest. Real conversations, useful learning and tools you can take straight back to your practice. You'll also meet trusted industry partners, leaders in their own field who are there to support you and help you grow with confidence. You will leave clearer, better connected and ready to lead. Head to locampm.co.uk to book your free place and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook to stay up to date. We would love to see you there. And I think as well, one of the big reflections I have on that is I don't need to do it all on my own. We used to, I do a lot of work with searches and stuff like that. And now, I'm saying to practices, have you subscribed to Ardens and One Template, Primary Care IT and the teams like that, because they're doing this at scale. So, yeah, there might be the odd local tweak you might need to do. But why reinvent the wheel? That's probably quite an extreme example now because they've come around into a lot of practices. But there was a time when they were only in a few, and you'd hear about them at the conferences, and the same with like the Accurexes and those kind of companies when they first started. So to be able to kind of jump onto those trends and actually get the use out of them, free your time back to focus on something else that somewhere else where it's needed, I think is huge, and it's something that we don't put value, both time and financial value, on very well in practice because we just see it as another thing on the to-do list there, that never-ending to-do list. But I think we need to invest in them more and more.
We know it's an investment, don't we?
Yeah.
Taking that time out of practice for 1 day, 2 days, there's that many different conferences going on. However, it's about picking and choosing which ones you may get more value out of. And we know that they're in main places like Birmingham, London, Manchester, Newcastle for the big main conferences. But being able to take that time out and investment, drag partners down with you.
Yeah.
As managers, make it a day out where you all go and learn together. And think about what conversations you want to have whilst you're there. Being open and present sometimes in those environments is worth its weight in gold. I think not rushing between sessions, because there is normally a packed agenda.
Yeah.
You can choose some of the sessions that you really want to go and listen to. If it's about finance, go and listen to the finance. Go and listen to the updates around CQC. Go and listen to, what somebody's thoughts are around neighbourhood working. What relationships are happening, what's happening in the world of HR and employment law. But then it's also being about being curious.
Yeah, without around the corner. Yeah,
self-promote yourself, but ask those questions. Try and have an understanding from somebody else's perspective, and I think it's about that active listening whilst you're there as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so massively. And we touched on there. The two factors of the equation are finance and time. You mentioned the LPM conference is coming up this year. One of the big things that we're really keen on is to have them as, if not free, as cost effective as possible. It's not always possible to do it for free, and this is where sponsors then come in as well. So they provide then the education for their services or whatever it may be, but then they also help keep the cost down. So when there is multiple factors and multiple reasons sometimes not to go to a conference, well, actually finance is one of them. Yep, you might need to pay for travel, but you don't need to pay to get in. And in other industries, conferences can be hundreds and hundreds of pounds for the same equivalent value that we get for free because of the sponsors. So it's something that we need to work with and embrace and get them. And then once like you said, get the most out of it. Where I was thinking earlier on about, how do you justify that time out? So I'm hoping that is for those that haven't gone to a conference, and this can be that I'm going to go, whether it's a small one like one of ours or a big national one, I'm hoping this can be the excuse, the reason, the catalyst, whatever word you want to use. But, and I hope we can help you kind of come along. And obviously if you do and we're there, please say hello, because it's always lovely to see more and more people. Because my own experience, I didn't used to go to conferences. I did a few when I was with the EMIS NUG in the trustee role there. But then the big national ones I didn't start going to till I was speaking at them. And now I think back about it and regret it almost not going earlier, because so much of the innovation is there, ahead, months, sometimes years ahead. I remember best practice a couple of years ago saying to the IMS team, what's new? And they just said, we're looking at MMRV. And I was like, what's that? And, a year ahead of the national program, they were like, right, this is the vaccine. This is how it's going to roll out. So I was able to go back to the practice and say, this is coming. And the nursing team, oh, brilliant. Just from a passing comment there, when the big change then did happen, we were already ready for it. And, the nurses were there, ready to go for the training and all that lovely stuff. So, and that wouldn't have come if I didn't have a cup of coffee with the IMS team in London at this conference. So there is real value, and hopefully you can use that to go.
Putting that time and effort and investment in yourself is invaluable. I remember being a practice manager up in East Lancashire, and a number of us would go to management and practice in Manchester, every year when it was on. We'd go down as a group of practice managers, we'd go and do shared learning, go and visit the various speakers and try and cover as much as we could, and then share it back at a practice managers meeting later on down the line. But at that time, we also had a bit of a social event and went out and had some lunch and dinner afterwards. So we made a full day of it. And it was so invaluable because we were all bouncing off of one another, with ideas afterwards. And then when we went back to our practices, it was like, right, did you know about this? Do you know about that? I've met so-and-so, what can they do for a group discount for all our practices? What can they do for the PCNs nowadays?
Yeah.
It's about having that buying power as such when you make those connections and those networks. And I think, that's the joy of it. And I would say that I learned far more by going to conferences than if I'd just stayed in practice, working on my own, not liaising with other practice managers, keeping myself up to date every year of what's coming, what's happening in the big wide world of the NHS and NHS England type information.
That's really interesting, because I was just about to ask you a question. You partly answered it, but let's expand on it a little bit more. Why is investing in yourself as a primary care leader just as important as investing in your practice?
I would say every good manager needs to invest in themselves, don't they? If you're not, whether you are, for example, being a chartered manager with a chartered management institute, I've got to invest time and effort in my own personal development. I know, for example, IGPM, they've got their accreditation for primary care managers. How can you showcase that you are actually providing that return on investment of whether you've paid for your accreditation, whether you've accredited by lifelong learning, etc., etc. I feel it's really important. I wouldn't be where I am today without investing in my own time and effort for training, expansion of knowledge, and keeping up with what's happening in the industry. Otherwise, I feel, am I doing myself justice? Am I doing the profession justice? Am I doing the best for what could be happening for patients? Especially now with all the changes to the NHS app, you've got to be able to keep abreast of what's happening out there with technology, with various other areas. And as we move towards the single care record at some point, it's only by attending conferences and networking that you'll probably pick up on the early snippets of how that's going to happen.
True. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Especially when you're talking about the accreditation and with IGPM and everything like that, it's no longer about setting the time aside. That needs to become the norm. In the same way that you have protected learning, it's something we've got to factor into our roles going forward. It used to be when all the QOF changes would come out and everything like that, it'd be like, right, I'm not here for a week because I need to read up on what's new and come up with a plan for the practice and everything like that. And it's very hard to do that now. But I think, for the reasons you said, I think we have to stay on top of everything, or we run that risk. CQC then come knocking and say, how are you keeping updated with what's coming up in the future? And I attend our ACB webinar every so often. I think it needs more than that now. I think you have to be attending and reflecting on your learning. We said sharing it with colleagues. If we couldn't all go, right, I went to best practice, this is what I picked up, just over a coffee with someone, with the rest of the team for half hour or something like that,
I take my notebook with me and I take my iPad with me and I'm forever scribbling.
Yeah, good point.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I sometimes sit there and you see people sit and listening, but they don't take notes.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer, we've got to be able to take notes, unless you're one of those learners that can
I was going to say different
memorize.
learning styles, isn't it?
Yeah,
But I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah,
whether you're an ASKL learner or whatever, like,
yeah.
away you go.
And to be honest, don't worry if you forget your notebook or anything like that. You
Yeah,
can normally end up getting one for free. So don't worry if you forget a pen and paper. Yeah, you'll get one of them eventually.
I'm not doing healthcare with all their chocolate.
So I think that's a really fun note to end on. And I said I hope this has been helpful. This episode is generally to kind of empower those that haven't been before to bite the bullet and say, right, this year I'm going to go to one, whether it's a big event or a small event, and I'm going to give it a go. And hopefully that'll be then the first of many going forward for the reasons we talked about today. So
invest in yourself.
yeah, invest in yourself. Yeah, that's it. That's a lovely way to end it, because you invest in yourself, and the stuff you bring back to your practice, as well as your own reflections and your own learning, is incredibly powerful. Your practices will benefit from it just as much as you will as well. So, and that in turn will, help make the day job be, if it's not already, that little bit more enjoyable, give you more opportunities. So, James, thank you very much for joining me today. We've mentioned lots of different events and companies today, so we'll put all the links in the show notes. Some of the conferences at time of recording this have just happened, so they might not be again till next year. But, even then, book a place. If there's some local to you carrying on throughout the year, I say we've got our ones coming up. Management and Practice have got some best practices later in the year in Birmingham. Do come along, and I say, do say hello as well. And if we're going, we'll try and organise a bit of a social like we did for the primary care show as well. So if anyone wants to come along and be an introverted extrovert, you'd be more than welcome. So James, thanks again for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Halfway Point. Thanks, James.
See you all. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of The Halfway Point. We hope today's conversations has given you a fresh inspiration and practical ideas you can take straight back into your practice. You'll find all the links and resources we mentioned in the show notes at locumpm.co.uk. The Halfway Point is available on all major podcast platforms in both audio and video formats, so you can tune in however suits you best. If this episode helped you, we would generally love to hear from you. Leave us a review or a comment. Not only does it make our day, it also helps us shape future episodes around what matters most to you. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you do not miss next Wednesday's episode. And if you know a colleague who would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching for the Locum Practice Manager. We're on YouTube too, where we share practical tips and tutorials for primary care managers. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep improving, and we'll see you again next week at the Halfway Point.